in the public gallery for attending today. Because we have quite a few people in the public gallery, actually not as many as we thought, but that's a good thing. We are going to have a little readjustment of tonight's agenda. To the members of corporate scrutiny, we will be running through 1, 2, 3. And then we will do 4, which is public questions time. And then where you see 5 on your agenda, we will move up 7B of the cabinet agenda. So we will go back to the cabinet agenda and run through it, but so that people who are from schools, etc., and we've got lots of officers here as well from the schools, we will make sure that we do that early so you don't have to sit through all the other joyous things that the rest of us councillors have to sit through for the rest of the evening. Is that everybody okay with that? If I'm looking at the chief executive here, she's got my eye. If we finished the parts about the schools before 6 o'clock, then we will move forward the quarterly performance management review from 10 up the agenda. But if it's after 6 o'clock, then we will leave it where it is on the agenda. Reason being is because the finance officer cannot be here after 6 o'clock. I've been assured that it's not essential he does attend, and Councillor Jordan's here now and he knows everything, so we'll be fine. You're not laughing, Phil, at all, are you? No, you are now, that's fine. Right, so apologies and changes of membership. As far as I'm aware, we only have one apology. It was quite a late apology, so we couldn't have a substitution, and that was for Councillor Lever. We have no... And Councillor Brody. And Councillor Brody. Thank you. Minutes. So I've had a late substitution for some amendments to the minutes. What I'm going to do is ask councillors to agree the minutes as they were that were circulated. I think with corporate scrutiny, we need to make a bit of a premise here, and we do have a bit of guidance to refer to, that if we're going to make changes to the minutes, they should not be half an hour before the start of this meeting, especially when we have a loaded agenda like we do. So what I will do is I will hopefully have a vote to agree the minutes as read, and then the amendments to the minutes I will circulate to everybody, and you can see why I didn't actually change them. It's more semantics. So is everybody who attended the last meeting happy to sign off the minutes? Yes, lovely, thank you. Sign these? Declarations of interest. So when I say declarations of interest, they're pecuniary and pursuary. I always get it wrong. Anyway, can we not have what we had at full council one time when we had something about dog walking and things and everybody lined up to owning a dog? I pretty accept that most people here are a parent or a grandparent and you have a declaration of interest. Because of that, I think that goes as read. So you don't need to put your hand up if you're a grandparent or interested in schools. Anything outside of that, do you have any declarations of interest? Nope, lovely, thank you. Told you it'd be quick. Right, I've announced the change that we're going to make to the agenda. So we do have public questions. This is meant to be for 15 minutes, but I am the chair. So if we do feel that we need to extend that slightly because we've got relevant, if someone's doubling up on a question, then I will say, no, we've already done that. But I do think it's very important that we do allow people to have a public question. When you go to ask a question, I turn my microphone off. If you haven't done this before, you then go in the public gallery and press the button to speak. Please make sure that you use the microphone, otherwise you won't be heard. Do we have anybody we didn't have any written questions, did we? Do we have any verbal questions this evening? Yes, we do. When you go to answer a question, can you announce yourself as well, please?
I'm Julie Layton. I'm also licensee of the White Lion in Allerton. And I have a question, please. Due to it not being a Church of England school, and also the fact that the proposed school underperforms Allerton Primary, could you please confirm that Barton Primary is not going to be your suggested school for pupils from Allerton, despite it being named as such?
Thank you. Mr. Whitaker, would you like to answer that? and maybe then the cabinet member, if that's okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the question. So within the proposals relating to school place planning, we have included in those proposals a school which is named where we know that there is capacity for any children in the school proposed for closure to be accommodated, should that be where the parents or carers of any children at that school wish to go. It also says in the report that if the parents and carers prefer to go elsewhere, whether that be for faith reasons or other, that we will work with them on alternative arrangements.
Do you have a supplementary question? Shall I just give you a little bit of heads up? What happened is, because we've moved up the looking into the cabinet agenda on this section, we are taking on board as scrutiny councillors, and we can interrogate that question or scrutinise it. I shouldn't use the word interrogate, although I do quite like it. We can scrutinise those questions further for you. So if we're listening and picking up stuff as well for you. Does anybody else have another question?
Mark Shipperton, Unison, trade union representing support staff in all 6 of the schools mentioned in the consultation programme, and I would want to say that we've just come from a meeting with senior management, and the trade unions have been happy in terms of the dialogue that's been established so far. But I just wanted to highlight the fact, and you know this, that obviously as a result of this, there is a deep anxiety amongst all types of staff in all the schools, not just the school's name, but also amongst those schools that potentially might be affected in other ways, such as special schools. And I'm aware of the deep concern amongst the parental community as well. I just wanted to ask what steps the Scrutiny Committee will be taking to ensure that there is the maximum possible consultation with staff and their trade union and professional association representatives, but also with parents and community groups attached to each of the schools, because we feel that this is absolutely essential, that if a change is going to be driven through or whatever is decided, it's got to be something that involves all sections that are affected. So I just wanted to ask what steps the Scrutiny Committee can take to ensure that that consultation does take place as promised by senior management so far. Thank you.
But I think the question was for the Scrutiny Committee as to the actions of that committee. Obviously, from the perspective of the Education Department, myself as the responsible cabinet member, we will be planning as much consultation as possible. I absolutely recognise the concerns that Mr. Chiverton sets out, and I have been meeting with school staff since the end of last year over this. So it's not news that there are those concerns, and that will be factored into the consultation process. But as I say, I think the questioner was asking what additional scrutiny of what we do is planned by your committee chair.
So in answer to that, yes, corporate scrutiny is here. The reason that we're looking at this today at corporate scrutiny is because it's on the cabinet agenda. The right place for it to sit will be in Children's Services Scrutiny Committee. I know that they're going to have a meeting, I believe it's in October, in 17th of October, where there will be a meeting, and the whole meeting will be for this agendaed item. So the committees are in place, but the right place for it to sit is Children's Services Committee. It's because that this is on the cabinet papers that we are the first committee that gets to discuss it and allow people to voice their opinions and ask their questions. So the process will be managed through the appropriate committees. Does anybody else have a public?
I do, and I'm satisfied with the answers that have been given, but I just want perhaps I could just ask Mr. Whitaker just to give the categorical assurance that there will be at each individual school that is in any way affected by the proposal meaningful meetings with the entire staff group and their representatives, and also with the with parental groups and community groups with attached to each of those schools. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chiverton, for raising this really important topic. My colleagues and I absolutely acknowledge the very significant sensitivity of this area of work. We absolutely acknowledge the very significant emotional attachment that not just senior leaders in schools, but often the entire workforce, as well as, of course, the children, young people and families that they serve, and also with the wider community, and the very significant sense of duty and responsibility that many of those involved with school communities feel for the communities that they serve. We are absolutely committed to working with compassion and kindness in everything that we do, in acknowledgement of that, in our communications, and in all aspects of this work. I hope that the island school community has confidence that this will happen in an open, transparent and full way. I would point to the significant amount of public engagement that has already taken place, that started in April and continued through into May with a series of public face-to-face drop-in sessions where anyone interested in the future of the island education system was welcome. We have received very, very significant numbers of emails and other pieces of communication into the directorate. They've all been logged, recorded, and I hope that you will take that as evidence that we are fully committed to progressing with this work in a very open, transparent way, where we will engage fully with all areas of not just the school, but also the wider community. There will be, depending on what Cabinet decide to do on Thursday, there will be a full consultation process if that is what Cabinet decide to do. That will involve face-to-face meetings in those communities, meetings with staff groups, and we are open to requests, suggestions from those communities about how they would like this process to take place.
Do we have another question? And can you remember to introduce yourselves, please? Thank you.
Hi, Nikki Coates, head teacher at Arreton St George's. Obviously, as a head teacher, I completely understand the process and why we are here as we are now and why we're going through this. I have lots of questions about the Royal Centre of the Island being it feels like the one that's been chosen. I will save those for the consultation process. My question today is, given that the general election pushed back this whole process, can we have some reassurance that upcoming elections for councillors isn't going to push this back any further, given that this is really having a huge impact on the schools? We've already had children leaving this week. We've got other children that we know are intending to be leaving. This is going forward going to have a huge impact on our school, on our budget, which I'd like to say is in credit at the moment. Thank you. Obviously, you know, that's important that we maintain everything that we're doing in the school at the moment going forward, and it would be a real shame if the number of children leave impacts what we can offer in the school at the moment.
I can give the assurance that a timetable has been set and the incidence of council elections next May will not affect that. The difference between council elections and general elections is that general elections aren't fixed in their date. So the initial plan, which assumed earlier this year that there would be an October election, obviously changed when there was an early announcement, and that caused a revised timetable to be created. But there's now, as we know, the council elections are next May, nothing of that nature that will interfere with the timetable that has been set. The Cabinet will make a decision on Thursday, and should that be to proceed to consultation, the timetable that then follows through will lead to decisions being made in December, and then the process that follows that. I couldn't give you the dates off the top of my head, but that is mapped out and is not affected by any subsequent election process.
Do we have any further questions? I can allow one or two more. How are we doing for time? Yep, that's fine. I can allow at least two more.
Hello, I'm Sahara King. I'm a parent of a child of Arraton. I'd like to ask what provisions are being put in place for children with physical impairments. My son has quite serious vision issues. He will need a safe environment that has no stairs, that has wider hallways, that has markings and such, but also one that is not crowded and one that he will have a chance to learn to map. If not, he will have to be deschooled and continue his education at home. I'm not quite sure in the proposal that I've seen, physical disabilities and impairments for children are being taken into consideration.
I think that's possibly one for Naomi Carter.
Good evening, everyone. Naomi Carter, Service Director for Education, Inclusion and Access. If this is voted on and we go through the consultation process, then every child in the affected schools will be working with parents to make sure their individual needs are met. And we'll be working with the schools to ensure that, you know, we can meet those needs effectively.
So, Jenna Jenkins, a parent. I have a quote from Jeff Williams, the diocesan director, who said, "Our view is that if an education authority proposes the closure of a C of E school, that there should be an alternative C of E school nearby that parents are able to send their children to." So my question is, can you tell us which nearby C of E school is able to meet or is able to accommodate all of our children in order to meet this criteria? Yes, sorry.
Yeah, I can provide a response to that. So Jade Kennett, Service Manager for Strategic Development. Absolutely, we would consider the faith element to that. And I can confirm the next closest school to Arraton would be Newport Church of England School or Carisbrooke Church of England School. And we would support parents to ensure that those children would have a place.
If I'm aware correctly, I believe they are full.
In certain year groups, they are. There is building capacity within both of those schools due to them both reducing their planned admission number from 60 to 45.
But a lot of parents at Arraton have children in more than 1 year. So how can you guarantee that there is space for both of them to go together?
Yeah, so we would work with parents to ensure that in individual circumstances, if that was a preference, we would ensure that can be met.
We will take that on board and ask a few further questions, I'm sure, about that in a minute when we move on to the the scrutiny members. Is there anybody else with any other questions? Would you like to listen to the next part? We've got one more question.
Hi, I'm Mrs. Jenny Hughes, parent of a child currently at Oakfield Primary School and parent representative here this evening. I've got major concerns with regards to the proposals and the provision of school places if Oakfield Primary School were to close, given that over 50% of our children are of SEND needs, and also the fact that St Mary's, which is mooted as a place where these children may be eligible to apply for a place, St Mary's Catholic School, first off, it isn't a faith provision for C of E children because it's Catholic, and second of all, they have a strict admission criteria with which my concern is that most of our children, in particular those within EHCP, would be denied a place at, and I'm aware that there are only around 50 places at Greenmount, which is a 45-minute walk away for children to get to. So over 200 children, the figures don't add up for me. So I'd just like to understand the proposals because it hasn't really been explained how this is going to work. Thank you.
Yes, so a couple of points, apologies if I missed one there. So the first point in terms of the faith provision, absolutely, We are only naming these as proposals to be considered, and through the consultation process, all of that information we would expect to come forward in terms of understanding within the community what is really important to parents, carers, and most importantly, the young child's voice in all of this. That will be considered through that process. I think if we had all the answers to that now, that would be us preempting any process, and certainly we are here to do that open and transparent consultation process. Secondly, your point was around Greenmount Primary School being identified as a school 45 minutes away. We will need to work with parents on an individual basis, and apologies if that point is kept being repeated, but actually what we are seeing is a number of children travelling from all over the island. So in some circumstances, Greenmount may actually be their most local school. In some, it may be 6 miles away. So there will be really varied different circumstances within that. And so I think that absolutely close dialogue with parents and carers throughout will be key to that, and all of that we would expect the answers to come through the consultation and through the next stage. Was there any sections of your question that I missed?
Yeah, I would just like to point out to the Scrutiny Cabinet today that we've actually, in the area of Ryde, our school has got it's the poorest denomination of people, which means that their means are a little bit more limited than those of the local primary schools around us. And my concern is that people that are attending other schools in the locality are actually commuting to those schools, but our community of Oakfield lacks the ability to be able to fund commuting to the schools in the outside catchment area. And most of our pupils, excuse me, I don't have a figure as of yet, but I'm working on it. Most of our children walk to school, and a lot of our children, because a lot of them have faced we've got high pupil premium population in our school. A lot of the children are either living at or below the poverty line. So the parents don't own vehicles. There are a lot of single parent families, and also a lot of children that have social workers. So that means that they might not necessarily be living with a primary parent. So my concern is the provision for that and how much that's actually going to end up costing the council if you then have to put on transport for these children, in particular the SEND children, who wouldn't be able to just travel on a public bus, of which it would take 2 to get from where they are to places like Greenmount, for example, the proposed school. I'm sorry to keep banging on about Greenmount. I know that there are other schools available. Thank you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. All of that is understood, and we understand that the wider role that schools often play in terms of supporting families, and that's absolutely key. That will be part of the consultation process if Cabinet provide approval to proceed. That work directly with dialogue with parents and carers, and again the key professionals that work with schools. We would anticipate working through that consultation process to gather all of that and understand if that proposal was brought forward to Cabinet in December, that actually what additional support may we need to put in place to work with families.
Thank you. So that's the end of public questions. As I said, we're going to move forward with the Scrutiny Committee looking into this part of the agenda, of the Cabinet agenda, because as I said, this is what corporate scrutiny is here for. It's for us to be like a critical friend and looking what is on the Cabinet papers and ask relevant questions. We've moved that forward. Before we start that debate, can I just give some ground rules? And as you know, it will go like that if we don't abide by them. I want everybody to remember that every council officer that is here was tasked with a job to do. It is not an easy job to do, and they have done it thoroughly and to the best of their ability. So I don't want anybody naming any council officers or anything like that. I want us to ask questions on the paper. What I won't have is anybody mentioning any other schools. So we don't want anybody going, well, it should have been this, it should have been that. We need to actually look and ask the relevant questions on the paper as it is stated in front of us. Is that okay? And as I'm chair, I get to ask first question. So my question would be, I'm really concerned about parental choice. I understand that lots of schools, for example, Godsill and Arreton, you're looking at numbers rather than sort of reports and Ofsteds and things like that. But I personally don't think, when I've looked at it, we're taking into account parents who are travelling to work as well. Arraton and Godstow are quite on a central route. If you work in Newport or in Bride, I think some of the suggestions would actually take parents well out of their way in the mornings, you know, which means, you know, you might think, well, then that's the parents' choice. You know, we all encourage parents to go out and work and earn a living, you know, or whatever successful government, it's always, you know, you need to go out and work. My concern is that you're going to be getting small primary school aged children up even earlier in the morning to say, go to a school, as the suggestion for Godstow, I won't name the school, but actually, if you work in Newport, that's sort of a 3-day camel ride, as my mother would say, and then you've got to go back on yourself to then go to your place of work. Are we taking that into account? And while we're taking into, you know, we've heard lots of things about faith. My concern is parental choice, and actually that parental choice is also founded around, you know, how long a day those children will have to do to accommodate everything. Thank you.
Firstly, the assurance is that that has been taken into account. One of the key pieces of information that's fed into the process is that we know where all the children live. And there are maps which we made available as part of the consultation process that show you for each school that series of dots around the island where the children come from. And that has been a key part of the information that's been considered. And certainly in reaching choices to put forward as part of this process, whether parents will be left with unreasonable journeys as a result of the proposals.
My point was, I've seen the data, I've seen where people live, but the data you haven't got is where those families work. That's the bit I think that has to be taken into account ultimately as well. I get the bit, you've looked at all the data and where people live and they're coming out earlier, but what you can't see is where those parents live.
And that's why we have a consultation process. So, as I say, we can take account of the data we do have, and the most important consideration is the children. So, as I say, it's looking at this stage, what we can do is identify the reasonableness of journeys expected from home to school. I take your point about work, but as I say, that's something we don't, it's not 1984. We don't have all that information about where all the parents work, but those are things that come out in the consultation, I suspect. But of course, this is overlaid by parental choice. And as one can see from those maps, some parents make interesting choices as to how far they are prepared to travel to go to a particular school. And that may be for various reasons. One of those might be work. But I think that would be something that comes out during the consultation if that takes place.
Members of the Scrutiny Committee, can you ask your question? Who's first? Raise your hands in an orderly line. Councillor Downer.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'd just like to ask, and I think I've asked this in the Children's Committee as well, about the difficulties of when the school's closed, transport. Now, there seems to be a bit of a grey area about transport provision. And it will cost a lot of money if you had a, say, young child, you was going to take them to the new school. Parents would want to take those children to that school. They'd have to come home again and then go back again, presumably on public transport. That's going to cost them quite a substantial amount of money, especially if they were a deprived family. And also preschools, how are you going to square it if a school is closed and loses the preschool? Thank you.
Councillor, thank you very much for that question. And if I may answer it, and also link into the previous question about parental choice, because I think whether we're talking about parental choice or whether we're talking about transport or whether we're talking about any of the other factors, and there are many, many factors which have been considered in this: parental choice, transport, education outcomes, distance from where a child lives, etc. We have to think about all these questions in the context of the island's new draft education strategy, which was published in July, because all these proposals are a fundamental part of that wider education strategy. If I may just remind the committee about some of the key priorities within that strategy. There are 5 key priorities, but if we're talking about 3 of them, so special educational needs and disabilities, parental choice, we know that parents of children who have special educational needs, we've heard from the public gallery this evening about the very high levels of special educational need that we have, the parental choice of those families and about how they do not have access to adequate provision at the moment. Some of those families who are having their children transported to the mainland so that their needs can be met because there is not appropriate provision on the island. That's where an example of where a parent is not able to choose a school within a reasonable distance of their local community, of the community where they live. It's an example of where the transport issues for that community are very significant. One of the other priorities is around our workforce, and you'll see in the proposals that there is within there a proposal to establish a centre of excellence around child development, about teacher training. We know that parents tell us that the quality of education is extremely important to them, and that is included in the proposals. And one of the third priority in the strategy, which I want to remind the committee about, is about a sustainable school system. Now, parental choice is one of the key drivers of where children go to school. And we've heard that parents at the moment, and we know this from this very detailed analysis that had happened, are currently choosing sometimes to walk to their local school and very often to travel very significant distances across the island. And that is because they have a choice to do that, because they may be choosing to go to a school of a certain faith denomination, or other things about the school, which is what they are using to make their decisions. But there is consensus, I think, about certain things on the island, whether it be about parental choice or about transport, and the links to it. There's a consensus, I believe, that we have to take action to improve education outcomes for all island children. Yes, there are some young people who do extremely well, but if you look at it across the wider group, the island benchmarks, very low against any comparison, and there's consensus that we must take action. There's consensus that the very significantly changing demographics on the island, where the birth rate seen as the number of children entering reception has decreased by 38%, or the numbers of children entering education is forecast to go down by 38% between September 18 and September 27. Very, very significant. So there's consensus that we have to do something. And there's also consensus that the finances of certain schools, which again is driven to an extent by parental preference, is not sustainable. So the statistic you may have already seen is that in the current financial year, our maintained primary schools will spend £2.6 million more than they receive in income. So they're going to spend, this is the forecast that was delivered by schools in May of this year, that in this financial year, they will spend £2.6 million more than they receive in income from the Department for Education. Now, partly that is driven by parental choice, and it's not sustainable. We know that this has a serious implication for the council. So yes, it could be that some of these proposals result in some increased transport costs. And I'll pass over to a colleague in a minute who will address the matter about what is actually the council policy about what qualifies for school transport and what doesn't. But we have to look at this in the context of that bigger picture, because the financial situation across the primary school system is very significant, and the council, which inherits debts from schools that close, needs to be aware of that and managing that financial risk. So I hope you can see that these questions about parental risk and also about transport need to be seen in that bigger context. Now, in terms of these schools that have been proposed, the proposals and the schools that have been included for consultation around reprovision, retention within the education system, use for other things, and indeed closure, it is our professional judgment, having looked at all these factors, that this is the optimal next step, first step to implementing our proposals within the education strategy to drive up outcomes for all children. There are, areas of it that we absolutely understand will cause concern for those communities directly involved, and we've heard about some of them this evening. But it's our judgment that, having looked at all the factors and considered a large number of different scenarios, that these proposals of these 6 schools are the optimal first step. And alternatives will have different challenges associated with them, and we believe that any alternative, they will be bigger challenges, and on a whole island aspect will not be as favourable for all island children. If I could just pass to one of my colleagues, and they can just be really, really clear about when children qualify for school transport and when they don't, and how this will feed into any specific proposals that do proceed.
Yes, so I can provide that information. So our transport policy would apply, and the criteria within that is that if a child is under the age of 8 and lives in excess of 2 miles from their nearest school, then they would qualify for home to school transport. If the child is over the age of 8 and they live in excess of 3 miles, then they would be eligible for home to school transport. There is an additional layer to that in terms of safe walking routes, and individual routes would be assessed on that basis. And just to clarify, that is from the moment that the child leaves their front doorstep, not from the next closest public transport access point.
Scrutiny, who's next to ask a question? Councillor Lee, you'll be ever so quiet.
I do have a number of questions, but this particular one I'd like to start with. I'd like to get an understanding of the consultation process, because if you're going to consult with people, are you consulting that actually once the cabinet basically agrees the report, or if it agrees the report on Thursday, that it's a foregone conclusion that those schools are basically being consulted onto i.e. the pupils onto somewhere else, or is it being consulted whether that school is suitable for closure? And my question, if that is the case, what actually happens if you come to the conclusion that there is clear evidence that that school should not close? Because you will then be in a place where, how do you then start a process with another school within that? Because I think the big issue of residents is, and I had this at a meeting that I was, where someone says, is this a done deal, right? You know, if the cabinet passed this off, whatever we say, is our school going to be closed? Now, if we're being honest with people, if that consultation is that those schools can provide evidence in their communities that they're actually viable, right? And actually, should remain, what happens in December and how do you report that back?
It is not a done deal. It's going, if the cabinet makes a decision on Thursday to have a consultation, there will be an open, transparent consultation, and that will gather information, and then decisions will be made as a result of that. We can't prejudge those decisions, so we'll wait to see what comes out of the consultation. If it is established that a school should not close, then we have to reconsider, plain and simple.
What would then you do? Do you start the whole process again with other schools? I just don't totally understand.
Well, we have a problem with surplus places. I think thank you for saying that, Michael, because I think it is getting overlooked in this process that we need to address that surplus place issue. With the way, and that's because of the way schools are funded. They're funded per pupil. So if there are too few pupils, too many schools are underfunded. And as Mr. Whitaker said, our key driver here is our education strategy and our need to improve standards, which are not good on the island. We're not going to have a chance to do that unless we address our surplus places. What has happened at this stage is a consultation is proposed and a list of schools has been identified as, I think Mr. Whitaker used the phrase, the optimum list, given the restraints that we have. There's some restraints upon choices of schools to go forward, but we've come up with the optimum list that achieves a balance between removing enough surplus places from the system, but also maintaining a reasonable journey to school for children and other factors as well. And that's the proposal we're putting forward. You're asking for what's the result of the consultation going to be, almost, because we have to have that consultation on those proposals. It is not a done deal. We see what comes out of the consultation. We've seen with previous consultations, certainly in West White, where initial options were rejected and a revised option came forward at the end of the day. But we have to go through that consultation process before we can determine what the outcome of this process is and what subsequent process will happen, may need to happen if there are changes to what is initially being proposed.
Thank you, Councillor Baker. Can I just add something to that? And I'll bring you in, Mr. Whitaker, in a minute. We've had lots of mention of 330 places. This consultation resolves 195 places, doesn't it? And we keep listening to about first steps. I think we all have to have an understanding that this, as soon as you mention a school, you can see already the children's education is being affected, because there will be as worry within a school. You know, however much you tell a parent, don't let your child really know what's going on, it will upset them. Children are quite, good at listening indoors and understanding what's going on. So already there will be a ripple through those schools' community and those children that is affected. So we've had lots of mentions so far of first steps. This takes into account 195. We're now listening that some schools might not come off it after the consultation shows that they don't need to. But doesn't that mean then the straight answer has to be then another school has to be looked at? And if this the first steps that is happening, do you have a second list for the second stage? And will a school only move off the first list to the second list, because we've still got a gap from 330 places to 195? Mr. Whitaker, you're itching to speak.
Unless Councillor Baker wants to start.
I was going to say there is no second list as things stand. An optimum list, given all the considerations, has been created. It is, as I think you're trying to do, arguable, very arguable, that the list should perhaps be bigger and more schools should be named. But what we have done, and I referred to this in the answer to Councillor Lilly, is to reach a balance between achieving a sufficient reduction in surplus places, but not going so far as we risk at this stage placing unfair burdens, say in terms of transport, on parents and children. So it's the judgment of Solomon, really. That's where we've come to in terms of what is a viable proposal to achieve the aim of reducing surplus places, but also not to harm parents, children unduly. We take the fact that obviously nothing's nice about this process, and this all within the context of the education strategy to those two factors feed in to hopefully improving our very poor standards, which must be at the root of these considerations.
Councillor Bacon, you're an excellent politician, but I go back to what I was saying, and what Councillor Lilly was saying. If this is a consultation with 6 schools on the list and you don't have a second list, Councillor Lilly asked you, if at the end of the consultation in December, it's agreed that some of those schools come off, we have a set figure that we need to achieve, how do those schools come off? Because suddenly you will be in December and then having to look at other schools, which you are saying you haven't got another list or any other schools that would be in your radar. How do schools come off the list? Because schools will naturally save to fight open. You will save to fight, I'm sure every parent up there and teachers got better things to do this evening than listening to us lot, but it's really important to them and that's why they're here. So when they ask a question, we're going to fight to save our school. How do they save it if they know that you don't have somebody else that has to go out to consultation?
Mr. Whitaker is wanting to come in, but again, we have to go through the consultation process. Again, I think you're trying to answer a question that hasn't arisen yet, might arise, but might be affected in many ways by the process that we may be following after next Thursday. But I think I should hand over to Mr. Whitaker at this point.
I think
he wishes to speak.
I just clearly need the answer. The question has been raised. There is not a parent or a teacher who hasn't said, if our school, we go through the consultation and we fight for our school and it comes off the list, what happens then? The question has been raised. It's raised every single day by every single parent. If our school doesn't close, we're on the list to close. If we come off it, is there another school that goes on to it? That really is the question.
Thank you, Councillor and Chair, for the questions. So just to be very specific about the dates. So if Cabinet decide on Thursday to progress with the proposals, which is to move to a consultation phase, the consultation would start on the 20th of September and would run until the 1st of November. The findings of that consultation would then all be written up, they'd be published, and Cabinet would then decide on the 12th of December what they are going to do next. Within that consultation period, there is the bespoke Children's Scrutiny Committee. It's on the 17th of October, which is the single item meeting to allow the Children's Scrutiny Committee to examine the proposals, and that's within the consultation period. So I think that will be helpful timing for that. As Councillor Bacon says, we don't know what will come out in the consultation. So it would be wrong to speculate on what would happen after that. But it's absolutely the case that we are, as I've already said to the answer to Mr. Chiverton, we are absolutely committed to being open and transparent and listening to the views of school communities. It's also true, as the chair said, that if you add up the numbers of places included in these proposals, which is a removal of 197 places in a year group over time, not all straight away, but over time, and you compare that with the numbers in the school place planning strategy, which was considered by Cabinet and by Children's Scrutiny in July, that 197 is not enough. And it's very common practice for local authorities around the country to treat their school place planning as an ongoing continuous process, and certainly for it to be reviewed on a formal basis at least every year. And certainly I think the view of my colleagues within the Education, Inclusion and Access Department is that that would be appropriate for this council to do. It should be viewed on an ongoing basis. So, for example, going back to parental choice, we will see over the coming weeks, months, and depending on what the outcome of the consultation, the decision of Cabinet on the 12th of December, if that's where it goes, we will see parents expressing their views about where they would like to send their children to school. And we should look at that developing scenario, and we should include that in our plans, our future proposals. But it is true that this is a first step that needs to be taken because the demographics on the island are changing so significantly that unless something happens, like a very significant amount of in-migration happens, or the birth rate reverses its current trend and very rapidly starts increasing, that we will still have significant number of surplus places. And actually, if you look at the table on page 11, in this document, the Isle of Wight School Place Planning Proposals, it actually has there in the bottom row the surplus which would be in existence if our forecasts are correct and if these proposals are fully implemented. And actually, whilst the surplus goes down in academic year 25-26 to 117, and you'll remember that we would always have a degree of surplus capacity in the school system because we need to allow for changes, parental choice, etc. It then goes up by 27-28 academic year back up to 253, which is almost as high as it is in the current academic year. So, these proposals are not a full solution to the changes that we need to make as a result of the very significant decrease in the birth rate on the island. It is a first step towards making those improvements. But actually, one of the benefits of doing it in this staged way is we can learn as we go from what parents want to do, from where parents choose to send their children. And I think we can incorporate that on an ongoing basis. One more point, if I may, which is that in this myriad of complex factors which have been considered to arrive at the list of 6 schools which we believe to be the optimal solution, is if you are a child who has not yet started primary school but will do in the coming years, or indeed if you're a child who's started reception just in the last week or so, or you're in year 5, and therefore in September 25 you'll be going into year 6, and so you'll still need a primary school place. Where are these children going to go to primary school if the school that they're currently in is closed at the end of this academic year? And we've looked at the impact of different scenarios, and we have attempted to reduce or minimize the additional travel that children have to undergo for that. We have looked to minimize the amount of any additional classroom capacity that may be needed to be put into this and to accommodate those children in the short term. And actually, that is one of the caps on the list being 6 and not higher than that, because if we had proposed more schools than 6 in this proposal, what we would have had to do is put in additional spare temporary classroom capacity in schools. Some children will have been asked to travel significantly further than they are under these proposals, and that is why we believe that this list of 6 is the optimal list of schools, and that is why we believe that this is the appropriate first step in these improvements to the island's education system.
I think the chief exec has been trying to get my eye, and then we'll have to bring this part of the agenda to a close reasonably soon. So I would like an idea if any other councillors have any questions once the chief executive is finished.
I thought it might be useful to kind of summarise what I think is the answer to your question and the question that has been asked, in that what the Cabinet will be doing is making a decision on whether to consult on 5 specific schools for closure. 6, sorry. And after that consultation process, it will move to either close all of those 6 or a number of those 6. What it can't do at that point is say, we're not going to close school A, but we're going to replace it with school B, because it hasn't consulted on school B. So the decision in December, if it makes a decision this week to consult, will be which of those 6 will close. We will still have a surplus of primary school places, but it would mean starting a review of how to deal with those school places in the round again.
Thank you. Councillor, can I just see who, so I can work out how long we got? So Councillor Drew hasn't asked a question yet, so he can go next. Then Councillor Downer, then Councillor Lilly, and then I will call it. Claire Critchson, Councillor Critchson wants one. You can all have one each. Do you want one, Councillor? Yes, so we're going to do one question each. Try and make them reasonably brief and concise, and don't double up on other people's questions, please. That's my job. No joke. Okay, so Councillor Drew.
Thank you, Chair. I think from my perspective, one of my main concerns with my area, right southeast and Oakville, is obviously the level of deprivation and poverty. And this is not, I guess, so much a question. I'm sure it's something that's going to be taken into account. But in terms of feeding back to councillors the relative weightings of some of those issues, both anecdotal and qualitative in relation to that, so that we can scrutinise effectively. Because I think, you know, this is clearly a very sensitive process. It's something that we're all trying to be very mindful of sensitivities included, but at the same time, we have a responsibility, which is to hold, as it were, the process to account, to really investigate things and to have that clarity, transparency, all the way along at every step. I think that is absolutely vital. So I'd make a plea for that to be very much the centre, as I'm sure it will be, that we get that data back and that we can have a really good understanding of how that's being weighed, because it is such a very balanced process, I appreciate, but we really do need to be able to make those points effectively. So I would like to sort of see, as it were, every 2 weeks, for example, perhaps a selection of feedback that parents have made. I mean, obviously we get direct emails, but we don't necessarily see what other councillors have had. So that would be very helpful. I appreciate that obviously has an implication in terms of officer time, but it would certainly be very useful. Thank you.
I was about to agree with you 100% until you said the 2 week thing. I'd have to go to officers to ask about the feasibility of that. Certainly, this committee is starting the scrutiny of this process, this potential process now, and this committee, I'm sure, will enter into this process when the consultation has concluded and that data is there to be assessed. We also, during the process, have the Children's Scrutiny Committee, which will have an ongoing role in this as well. So short answer is yes, absolutely. I don't know about the feasibility of rolling consideration, because that obviously might not give a sufficient overview and understanding of data. If it's picking things, you know, different elements of the community may respond quicker, some slower, some issues may not come out during the consultation, not be fully understood, revealed until at the end of the period. So I have a little concern about the viability of that 2 week suggestion. I don't know how off the cuff it was, but I'll turn around and see if there are any further comments on that.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor, for the question. So what we've done over recent months is we've adopted a practice which is linked to being open and transparent about things. So on the council website, we've established several new pages where we essentially publish lots and lots of information. So what we're anticipating doing is that we continue to do that in a bespoke section on the website. So we're able to publish as much information as possible on there, so that anyone who's able to go on there can, and we'll also make material available in an accessible format for those who are not able to access information by that way. If I may agree with Councillor Bacon just about, I wouldn't want to be committed to the 2 week thing, because it's going to be a huge amount of work and we'll have to work through what's actually practical.
Councillor Blake, then Councillor Critchison.
Thank you, Chair. In terms of the buildings, in the members' briefing, it was said that 5 are going to be repurposed. Do we have a plan for the 6th in order to keep it within the council estates, just in the hope that one day the birth rate does go up?
I think I could say there's no identified purpose yet. Obviously, we have 5 purposes identified. 2 of those have been attached to a particular site already. Because the schools were not identified and named until very recently, discussions about the viability of those other particular options at particular sites could not take place, because obviously it would have revealed information that was confidential. But I believe those discussions are underway and will hopefully become part of the consultation process. I suspect, from the knowledge I have from doing this job day to day, that other potential uses will arise and be suggested and may indeed come out through the consultation process. But the thing to remember is that these sites should serve an educational purpose. And that is very much part, again, of the education strategy, because as a hopefully a slight sugaring of the pill that we're having to take at the moment, is that we can find ways to support improving our standards and particularly support our SEN provision through this process by finding alternative uses for those sites. And there will be indeed the idea of a teacher training centre would be a massive benefit to the island in terms of helping to improve standards. So short answer is not at the moment, but I have very little doubt that something will be able to come forward.
Councillor Critchison.
Thank you, Chair. I think I've had a lot of concerns from parents because there are going to be several years. I'm based in the south of the island, so the closure of Godshill and Wroxall going to other schools in the south, that there'll be several years where there is overcapacity and where we're going to put those children for 2 or 3 or 4 years potentially in that area. And we're going to put children in porter cabins. How are we going to do that? Are we going to go bigger than the classes we've already got? I think there's a lot of uncertainty around that. So we need some information about how that's going to be dealt with for those years that it's going to affect for the next 3 or 4 years in that area.
Yeah, without getting into specifics, because obviously individual circumstances, parents are choosing to travel to those schools, and we have seen parents now opting to go to their more closest school. So actually, will the impact still be found within those direct areas is something that we need to work through. And if we had all of those answers, we would be preempting that decision, or we would be making decisions and ordering temporary classrooms when actually those places aren't required. So there is lots to work through, but I think we can provide the assurance that we will be working closely with parents, carers and the incoming schools to understand how that can logistically be undertaken and making sure that all children aren't impacted by that. So obviously the incoming school is factored into that as well.
Councillor Downer.
Thank you, Chair. A quick one. Do you envisage a rise in the number of parents choosing to home educate their children through this process? Thank you.
I think you could take views around the table. Personally, I do not think that is likely as a direct result of this process.
Quiet from the public gallery, please, as much as I might agree with you. Councillor Lilly.
I mean, I have put detailed, and I spoke to you today about my concerns about the report, and we'll be making my views also directly to the Cabinet on Thursday. But I'm very concerned about this kind of community v the building. In a sense, you're trying to do two things in the report. You're actually trying to look at the SEND issue, which is really important, but you actually identified buildings of that. And I mean, in the case in my community, a building which is actually important to the community, which is one of the poorest linked to the area of real deprivation and support, where you've got 50% of the children on free school meals and about 40% have social workers, things like this. And then you're identifying the building. So actually, it's as if the people are against the building and what that could be, when actually there should be a dialogue with the whole community, and that goes for all the schools of that. You know, 70% of the pupils that go to Oakfield actually come from a bigger estate which have a social landlord. Are you going to consult with those social landlord? Are you going to consult with the social workers? Because those families are quite intricate. I think that Councillor Modsdale said, you know, there could be grandparents and looked after by a kind of complicated arrangement that actually that is why that children lives in a particular area and aside. There's things like women's refuges and things like other particular places, the siblings, where they are at schools. And I just feel that the way the report is saying is actually we want your building, right? And actually the community can sort itself out. You've got to, when we're talking about poverty and cost of living crisis, we have a lot of families that go to these different schools that do 3 jobs to survive, and that's probably not enough, right? Within that, we have a huge percentage of single parents or reblended families that are quite complicated. And you've actually got to understand that. Otherwise, you're actually not just moving children to school, you're destroying a whole community. And I totally oppose how all these have been shoved into one report to actually tick the boxes, when actually they should be looked at separately. You should have resolved the situation of the schools first and then looked at the repurposing. But what you've done is you've actually put those things at odds with each other. And I think that is very unhelpful. But my message is linking on to what Councillor Drew said and what Councillor Mosdale, is you've actually got to do a much more detailed consultation, not just with the families, but all the stakeholders, the people around them, including work and others, because you have got, you know, families that the average wage on this island is £75 less than across the Solent. You've actually got people that are really struggling, and now they've got to think, how the hell am I going to cope with this? And as the Isle of Wight Council's mental health champion, and Claire Modsell was previously, we're not just talking about mental well-being, we're talking about what's my future going to be. And I don't think the report really adequately has put in place that to talk. I talked to the head of sovereign housing today, David Ball. He knew nothing of this, and he was absolutely alarmed of what is going to happen to the 3,000 so people that live in the, you know, in the mainly in, well, partly my ward and Councillor Drew's ward of that. I feel that we should have had a lot more talking. And the last point I want to make is the diocese owns these buildings in a lot of cases. And when I've talked to the diocese, I'm getting a different perspective when one that you're putting to me. Actually, the diocese objects to this. So how are you going to achieve this? So, for instance, Oakfield, you want to put in a special school. We haven't talked properly to the diocese about that.
Thank you, Councillor Lilly. I think we need to bring this to a close. I think we...
Chair, could I just possibly make a couple of comments? And there's one additional comment I would have liked to make in response to Councillor Downer, if you bear with me just a second.
No, not yet. I'll refer to...
I think it's quite important for the people who come here to hear answers to these questions.
Can I just sum something up first before you come in, and I'll let you end. There you go. I'll let you have the last word over me, Councillor Bacon. We will bring this to a close, but for everybody who sat in the public gallery and here today, and thank you for the officers for coming, I think we need to understand that this is going through a due process. It will go to Cabinet on Thursday. There is public questions at Cabinet as well, isn't there? So there'll be further opportunity for people who haven't come this evening to ask questions. There will also be a Children's Services Scrutiny Committee on the 17th of October. I am aware that the Chief Executive, if people want to come and listen to that there will be further rooms here within the building that will be made available. So don't think you're going to be just sat up there. We can actually make it, you know, lots available for here. I think there's lots of things that come out this evening that the Cabinet member will take on board, I am sure, and so will officers. I think there is a big health warning on this that everybody is fully aware of. And I've been a Cabinet member in the past, and these things are not easy to do. My fear would be, is having been part of a process when we moved to school, a few years ago. It's an enormous process. It is absolutely massive. It has a ripple effect to everybody involved. The whole community is affected, and actually it ripples across the island. So it's not just the people who have children in those schools that are affected. It does affect whole communities. My health warning would be on this is doing one school is really, really hard. How do you manage 6 schools that potentially would be closing by next September? And I also would like to ensure whatever committee this goes to outside mine, because we all know that if it's going to be asked, I'm going to ask it. And if I need to turn up and ask it again, I will be doing so. We need a level of honesty across the whole island. We listen to the cabinet member and we listen to the director. You have different terminology. The director talks in first stages. You know, anybody who hears the words first stages knows that there's other stages to come. So I would really appreciate, once it's outside of the remit of this committee, that there is a level of honesty to the public. People can deal with honesty. What they can't do is people do taking different types of language. So when it comes to Children's Services Committee, that the questions that have been answered today that probably you don't have the definitive answers for yet, by then you can answer them. Because if it's been asked tonight, it's going to be asked again. And by October, it will be asked more strongly and more forceful as people realise how this process is going. I will let Councillor Bacon answer, and you've got to be quick. Thank you. Thank you
will be
everybody
very
for
quick,
coming
but
this evening.
I'm glad you've allowed me to speak again, because I'd like to thank you for that statement. I think that is very helpful. And I would just add to it by saying it is important in this process that we make sure that we are working with and discussing correct factual information, not rumours, and we are careful of misinformation and false information. There have already been a few instances of that have had to be addressed. And I hope that people will take that on board. If there are views, facts, asserted facts expressed, come to the people, Jade, Naomi, Ashley, who can say whether that is correct information or not, or can check it. It is so important that we do this on the basis of the truth and correct information. The 3 points, very briefly, that I wanted to make were in response to Councillor Lilly. He raises points that are all absolutely valid to be taken into the consultation process. That's why, if this goes ahead on Thursday, there will be a consultation process, and that is, I think, almost we were in the consultation. It felt as if we were in the consultation process there, because those are the sort of things that need to be debated, discussed before we get to final proposals. In relation to the diocese, I must say that the education department here have been in ongoing communication with the diocese throughout this process. I understand they're making a statement tomorrow. So that will obviously be of interest, I'm sure. And thirdly, something I would have liked to add to the response to Councillor Downer, when I was asked for a view on increase in homeschooling. I was a little disappointed that the response from the gallery. One of the things that leads people to homeschooling is dissatisfaction with SEN provision. One of the key things we're looking to do under the education strategy is to improve our SEN provision. And for many of those families who feel they are forced to homeschool, to correct what is wrong with our schools and education that makes them feel they have to take that course. So I suspect it is correct that some will just say, that's hang it, I'm going out of the system. But I suspect some of those who don't want to do that, who feel they've been forced to do that in the past, I hope that we can create a system with the sort of facilities we're bringing forward already at the old studio school site, and others coming forward as well, that we will show people that there's a provision there that actually will serve them, and they don't have to feel forced into homeschooling. They can be supported properly in the system going forward, and hence the reason in part for my answer. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you ever so much for attending in the public gallery. If you want to sit through the rest of the agenda, which is the quarterly report, it's probably about 200 pages. You are most welcome to stay, but I think there might be something better on this evening that you could be doing. Thank you. And then there was just us, guys. Because Chris Ward won't be available now because it's gone 6 o'clock, we will stick to the agenda as read. So we will go to point 5, general exception decisions and urgent decisions. There is nothing to report. Progress update are page 11 and 12 of your papers to receive an update on the progress against outcomes arising from previous meetings and to provide an update on any outstanding actions. There was going to be a development session for all members, which is in the process of being arranged. Can we have an update on that, please? I believe the chief exec. It's against performance management framework.
Yes, we're in the process of getting that into all members' diaries.
That appears to be the only action outstanding at the moment. It's a good job I've got a deputy, haven't I? Councillor Spink has reminded me that the Kingston Marine Park is an outstanding action. Cabinet Member for Economic Regen and Culture and Leisure was going to give us an update.
Yes, happy to, Chair. So the update is that the public consultation period finished last Monday. I don't know if anyone's been on the planning portal to look, and maybe some members have if they're interested in it. Overwhelmingly supportive of it. I won't talk any more about planning. The planning, as it will be going to planning committee. I understand there are some planning committee members in the room, so I won't want to be say anything more about that. Let the due process go forward. I'm hoping that will be on the 24th of September with a fair wind. Yeah, that's the main update there for you. And the decision paper was signed on the 15th of August. So that's the update for you.
Thank you, appreciated. So we move forward to the forward plan, which is pages 13 to 26 of your papers. Has anybody got any questions on the forward plan? Appears to be no questions, no pre-prepared questions or anything.
On the KMP, I know in the minutes it said it would be the question then would go on to the regen committee. Is that now? Is that where it will sit now, or are you finished with it now at this committee? Thank you.
Yes, it's more appropriate it sits here rather than our committee. Thank you. Yes. Is it to do with the forward plan?
Yes.
Yes.
Have we got reassurance that the island anti-poverty strategy is near complete and we get it? Because I've been waiting for 9 years for it, or 8 years. Is that going to be definitely available at a scrutiny meeting, hopefully around December?
It's actually on the agenda for the health committee on the 2nd of December.
Oh, right, it's on
rather
the
than
agenda.
coming here.
It's on the agenda. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mel. It is good that things go to the appropriate committees. Work plan. Yeah, Mel can. Mel's going to come in here.
Just to mention on the published work plan that you have in front of you, the Newport Harbour supplementary document is listed for the committee for October, but that has now been forwarded to January, so that won't be on our agenda for October, just to let you all know.
Thank you. If we move on to review of the rest of the cabinet agenda. Some of these items are actually on our main agenda as well, aren't they? So the only thing that wasn't on there was the local enterprise partnership transition papers. So did anybody have, that was the only one that wasn't on the scrutiny, got the yeah. Does anybody have any questions that they'd like to make to cabinet on those papers for the local enterprise partnership transition? or on the service level agreements for children's services? No? No, we're quite happy to move on. I think everybody's sort of schooled out at the moment, aren't they, after the beginning part of the meeting? I can understand that. Right, we move to item 8. No, we move to item 9, which is papers 29 to 40, which is the corporate complaints annual report. I'm assuming as it's been in your papers in this great big wodge that everybody has had a read of that. Does anybody have any relevant questions, or were they interested in the report and you all want to take it as read? Councillor Critchardson.
I had read through some of those numbers of complaints, and I was quite shocked at the number of waste complaints that there was, and was wondering if we had any information about what was behind that. And was it, I think it included the tip in there. Has that changed since the online booking? What was creating that quite high number of complaints in that area? Thank you.
I don't have the detailed information this evening, Councillor Critchardson, but what I can do is take away and ask for a specific briefing for you on a breakdown of the type of complaints that we're receiving in terms of waste, both in relation to waste collection services vis-à-vis civic amenity sites, and provide more information on that. I think Alex Minns may want to make a comment as well, if that's okay, Chair.
I can't comment on the detail, but like Wendy, we can take that away and look into it. But I'm fairly certain we get a similar number of complaints every year, just because the sheer volume of people that obviously have access to waste services. You're looking at every island resident, aren't you? So if you look at the number of complaints, I think it's about 302, I think, in the paper, isn't it? It's quite a small percentage if you look at the fact that it's every household. But it would be useful to see whether the number of complaints has gone up in the last few years, really.
Thank you. It would be useful to have a bit, whether it's something we could do something about, or it is just general issues that can't have a function to them. But I expected lots in planning and social care, different areas, but that just seemed extremely high for something that we might be able to solve. Thank you.
Councillor Spink.
Thank you, Chair. I just have a brief question, or really a request for more detail. Page 32. Paragraph 13, which deals with cases upheld by the Ombudsman, but not put right, as it were, prior to the Ombudsman dealing with it. And that applies to all the complaints, whereas in similar organisations it says 13, it's only 13 of complaints. So I note on the next page that the council will provide training and guidance to staff, and also a new appeal/review of reconsidered decisions. I'm not going to ask, please, for an explanation or further detail of that now, but would it be possible to have some detail, a report on what that will involve?
Certainly, we can provide the committee with more detail on that. I think you've raised the point which actually both myself and Sharon Betts, the corporate director, have been speaking to senior colleagues about, in terms of building that understanding that conversations that happen with people in advance of them moving towards an official complaint are equally, if not more important than what we do with a complaint when it comes in, because we should be moving to resolve issues with people before they feel they need to make a complaint.
Thank you.
So I have one question on this. Are we sure this data is right? Because, and how is it collected? Because in the whole of that period, apparently there were only 2 people that moaned about penalty charge notices. I have never known anybody get a parking ticket and think they hadn't been done over, and got on their keyboard and written a letter about their penalty parking charge. I can think of a few I've written in that year. Isn't that classed as a complaint? Because I can't see over the whole of the year, of the whole of the Isle of Wight, only 2 people moaned about their parking ticket. And only 1 person moaned about their parking permit. I get some of the stuff that, us councillors are giving you a better time because, we take a lot of the moans from people about their roads and stuff like that. We absorb a lot of it. But I've never had anybody moan to me about a parking ticket or anything like that. Sharon, it stuns me that you've had only 2 complaints about it in a whole year.
Well, just to clarify, it's our customer relationship management system whereby we log our complaints. But when we're talking about penalty charge notices, when people are complaining, it's an appeal process. And so it would go through to the parking services as an appeal, not necessarily as a complaint, unless it was not specifically about the issuing of a penalty charge notice. If I may, this report is about formal complaints that the local government ombudsman deals with in relation to the council. Appeals to parking notices is not something that the local government ombudsman would deal with. They deal with someone who still isn't satisfied after that appeal, and then we've gone through the formal complaints process in the council.
So I'd only raise you the Cowes floating bridge is only 5. But
Exactly. Right. Is everybody happy if we move on? We'll try and whiz through the rest and be done by 7 o'clock if that's okay with everybody. We're on to number 10. We're on the home stretch, guys. Quarterly performance and monitoring report. Does anybody have any questions regarding the report? Starting to feel that everybody's just done now this evening. No, Councillor Spink.
I do have a.
Shall I let Councillor, so the Chief Executive sum up the report and then we'll have questions, a couple of questions.
I was simply going to say that I appreciate that there's an awful lot of data and information that is included in this report. So if councillors, committee members don't have detailed questions that they wish to put this evening, we can take questions outside of the meeting and refer to them at Cabinet and provide you with detailed answers to questions outside of this process, if that helps this evening.
Councillor Spink.
Yes, I only really have one question, and that is, before I ask it, I'll say this, that over the period of time, the information available in relation to the housing register has increased and is very helpful. One thing that occurs to me generally looking at that is that the number of people on the housing register doesn't appear to be reducing significantly. Now, that may be because more people are going on it, and as a result, we're still putting people in accommodation who were on it. But I wonder if it's at all possible. I don't want to increase workload, but all of this presumably is on the computer, so it should be relatively easy to obtain. What I'd like to see is statistics on, or a graph on, how many people are being in, say, the quarter, are being taken off the housing register and put into affordable accommodation. So, and I think that would be of interest to know. And also, I think it would be of interest and indeed helpful in determining whether our planning strategy and planning policy is actually solving the crisis that we all know exists on the island. So I find it a little bit frustrating sometimes that I can't find out if actually anyone, when a housing development is built, if anyone from the island is being taken off the housing register. Now, I don't expect it to be as specific developments, but it would be possible, I think, on a quarterly basis to know X amount of people have come off the register, ideally what bands they were in, and what accommodation they went into. So whether it was, for example, affordable housing to purchase or affordable housing to affordable housing for rent.
We can certainly take that away and look at it, Councillor Spink. I absolutely agree. The activity issue is key to understanding whether our wider strategy is working. Whether we can be as explicit as where they've gone to, I'll need to determine based on the information that we collect. But we should definitely be able to give something more about activity in terms of movement.
Thank you. I mean, it may be, I don't know, and it may be stretching outside of corporate scrutiny, but seeing as I've got you here, I would just ask you, it may be possible perhaps to require housing providers to provide that information if it's not available to us at the moment. Because I do think it's important for a number of reasons, but for example, for people to have confidence in the planning system and also in the housing register, it is necessary, I think, to know there's a sort of an assumption that affordable housing is affordable, which is now being undermined slightly. And an assumption that the affordable housing goes to people on the housing register. But there's no evidence of that I can see. And it would be very helpful, I think, to have the evidence, whatever source it comes from.
Thank you. Dawn Lang, who's our strategic housing manager, is in the room this evening, and I know she'll be taking copious notes on the information that you've just been asking for. So we will put together what we can so that it's included in the next quarterly performance report.
Thank you very much.
I thought I'd wait for everyone else, then do my. I'll do my question and your question, Councillor Jarman. Could you, as Chris Ward's not here, I'm sure, you know, with every chief executive and any financial officer, you know, you probably have daily conversations about the finances of the council at the moment. Could you give us a brief summary of where we are financially? What are the alarm bells that are ringing for you that are going to be going over budget? And which departments look like they are going to make their savings target? We just sort of want a synopsis really for this committee, as Chris Ward isn't here, of where we are financially at the moment. Where will you as Chief Exec and Finance Officer, your alarm spell be going, just so we can get a picture of where we are financially?
In terms of the overall financial picture, the capital programme itself remains fully funded and we've got no forecast overspending in that area. Our debt financing costs are forecast to remain on budget as well. Our cumulative borrowing levels are forecasted to remain within the limits that is approved in our council's capital strategy. Our actual borrowing outstanding is also forecast to remain within the limits that are within our capital strategy. At the moment, we have budget pressures arising, and you won't be surprised to hear this, in terms of adult social care and children's social care, and that relates to the cost of adult social care packages. We are seeing more costly packages of care needed as we are dealing with more complex individuals, and children's social care is around children's placements, and I know that the Children's Scrutiny Committee also consider that on a regular basis. We are looking at an approach which is seeking conversations with the individual directors in those areas and the relevant cabinet members to try and work out if we can mitigate those pressures as far as possible within year. That's the overall summary of where we are at the moment.
So a bit like same old then. same issues still there.
I think, you know, every local authority in the country is looking with interest at what's going to come out in the autumn statement. I'm not sure it's going to be particularly positive for local authority spend.
Yes, let's not hope about the single occupancy discount, but let's park that there for now. Councillor Jarman.
Thank you, Chair. I perhaps wrongly anticipated that a great deal of this evening was going to be taken up with education. So what I've done is I've gone through and identified only 41 numerical issues that I've got. I did think it would be inappropriate to raise them this evening, so I'll do that directly with the officers concerned. Some I've done already. For example, with Ashley over there, I've already asked for an updated breakdown of the buys per school debt situation. So we've had some information back, and I'm hoping we'll get that as well. And that will be an update effectively to the numerical information we were served in the spring per school. But one question I do have this evening is just trying to understand some of the classification of the boxes. So if we look on box 18F on the housing register and 19F, I struggle to understand how it is that the total number of households that are homeless, in temporary accommodation or requiring emergency accommodation is 219. So that's 3 classes added together gives you 219. And yet in 19F, the number that are in temporary accommodation is 247, which is higher. And I don't know, so either one of those is, I'm not understanding the number correctly, or the other numbers have to be negative to get it down to that total. So perhaps just on that one issue, because that's quite an important issue on the list, is there some explanation that we can have this evening? Oh, unfortunately on the PDF document, it does at the top. This is page 198 on the PDF document. I know the printed one has different page numbers. I don't know why, but for some reason it does. Would help if it didn't. Okay.
Rather than put you under pressure tonight, would you like to look that up and give that in writing?
Yeah. And perhaps just if the answer goes to everybody on the committee, just not just me, that would help everyone.
If everybody doesn't mind, I'd like to give like a little bit of a looking at the quarterly report and where we are mentioning capital, etc. And I didn't want to, Councillor Jarman, your microphone's still on. I just would like to do things, just mention something when we come to our finances. And I didn't want to say anything that was too inflammatory earlier. However, lots of the schools have struggled for a long time. We know that the council officer in charge of the capital programme has a very small budget to do stuff to keep schools waterproof and up and running. I think what would be very sad is some of these schools are then closed and they suddenly see in their place this massive budget coming forward for shiny buildings, car parks being built and that sort of thing. We haven't asked yet for the costings to come through on these school closures and what you intend to do. But I do think we need to be really mindful that lots of schools have really struggled. There is not a councillor here who doesn't have a school in their ward that doesn't know that schools struggle financially. If we're going to do lots of shiny differences to 5 of those schools who have struggled financially to have the things they want, the security fences put up in time, the car parks made to alleviate, the traffic, which would attract more children to their schools. I think we need to be really mindful of that when we're talking of capital budgets and how this plans for what's going to happen at the end of the consultation, if the consultation goes through, for what's going to happen to those buildings. Because I think it will have a really big effect within the community if they then say, well, you didn't have that money all this time in your capital programme to do this, so where have you found it from now? And I think that will be a really big question that will be asked at the end of this, and just sort of watch this space. Can I just say, if there aren't any other questions this evening, have we any other business, anybody raring to say something? Nope. everyone hold their peace. I thought it would go on longer this evening. I think Cabinet is going to be absolutely heaving. I'm glad I'm not one of you. Enjoy your time on Thursday. I think it's going to be a bit of a nightmare. You won't see me. I'll be in a cruise ship somewhere, so you enjoy, won't you? Anyway, on that note, I will call this meeting to a close. Good night.